All right, this next segment is called Ask Paul, where I read a listener email on the air and do my best to answer and help them through the challenges that they're having. And this is a special read because I'm actually doing this on video at the same time as I'm recording on audio. So if you go to my website, at theoverwhelmedbrain.com, you'll be able to see the video as well for the article for this episode. And I'll share with that at the end of the show. I'll share how to get to this video. But this is the first time I've actually used video to record this segment or any part of this show, because when you're recording audio, you can pause and then cut out that pause. You can take out mistakes. You can edit in a way where you sound more perfect than you really are. But with video, you keep going. And when someone edits the video, you can actually see the edits. You can see the transitions. And there may be some edits in this video. I don't know. But I'm going to do my best to read this through. And I've got my little tablet here that shows you the letter I'm going to read right now. So forgive me if this is a little strange how I do this, but here we go. I'm going to read this email right now. Hi, Paul. I've been a listener of the show for about a year now. It has helped me so much that I even refer it to friends who are now also avid subscribers. Thank you. Telling a friend to listen to TOB is like giving years of advice. I love it. Thanks so much. I've considered writing to you in the past, but normally I can refer to older episodes for guidance. Recently, something has happened in my life that many of your listeners can probably relate to, so I was hoping you could think of about recording an episode around the C word and how to cope when a loved one is affected by cancer or a similar illness. I feel like your change and death episode is close, but what about when the pain is happening right now and you need to be strong and show sympathy and you don't know what's around the corner? Just a quick note on what's happening in my life so far. I'm in a job I love. I've got a great relationship, even though we're currently long distance, and my housemate and I get along great. However, about 3 weeks ago, which is probably about 2 months now, because this email, when she wrote it, was about a month ago, and she said it was about 3 weeks before that, so I apologize for the delay in this. I know it's time sensitive, and I get a lot of emails like you'll see further down where I actually read where she says, I know you get a lot of emails, and I do get a lot of emails, so I apologize for the delay in this, but I wanted to address this now as soon as possible because you'll understand why in a minute. It says, about 3 weeks ago, my housemate was feeling unwell for a few days. She complained about pains in her legs and wasn't really herself. She saw a general practitioner who said, I don't know why you're here. The practitioner said she thought it was just a stomach bug and then sent her home to rest. The next day, she didn't look so well, so I drove her to work in the morning. We both normally walk. And then I found out that she had been unwell at work and then went home for that day. I went back home for the weekend. She said, I went back home for the weekend, and then her mom and dad stayed at our apartment and then ended up taking her home as her health was not improving. Long story short, a burst tumor, and a few misdiagnoses later, she was diagnosed with lymphoma, a cancer in her blood. Thankfully, the risky surgery is no longer the recommended treatment, but she'll be starting chemotherapy soon and potentially next week, so this has probably been happening for a few weeks now. Something I haven't explained yet. This girl has already had 2 major surgeries in her life, and her parents have each given her an organ for her survival. She has been through so much and is so young and full of life, and I'm finding it hard to deal with. For a while, I was going over scenarios and regretting not taking her to the hospital or doing something more, but now I mostly feel really sad for her, and I'm hoping she can fight it. I've tried to give the family space at the apartment in respect for what they're going through, and offer my help whenever I can, but I think that's probably all I can do. My mind is constantly thinking about my friend and her family, and in the mornings when I'm getting ready, I hear her mom and dad cry while they eat their breakfast. It breaks my heart. And then after that, I'm supposed to get out the door and walk to work and be creative and organized. I don't feel like myself. I know we've got a long journey ahead of us, and in between courses of chemo, she will likely return to this apartment, so I know I'm about to witness some horrific things. How will I care for her and take care of myself? How will I continue my own pursuits while remaining compassionate and expressing the emotions that are coming up? I don't want to run away from my friend, and I want to be here during this time, but I can't afford to completely lose my mind, both for my career and financially. The rent won't pay for itself. I'm sure you get a lot of long emails. Yes, I do. So I apologize for adding to them. Don't apologize. It's quite all right. I hope that the extra information helps you to understand where I'm at. I don't think that I'm being a victim. I feel so lucky to live the life I'm in and to have been in the presence of this amazing girl and her equally strong family. And I'm grateful for the time we've had. I'd just love to know what to do next and how to keep moving forward. All my best, Paul. I hope you never stop teaching. Jill. And if you know me well, or if you've been listening to the show, you know that I call everyone Jill, so that's not her real name. So Jill, this is a very tough subject because it involves potential losing someone that you love. It involves someone passing on in your life. And how do you get through this, especially when it hasn't happened yet? You don't even have any closure, so you don't know what's going to happen from day to day. And you also have members of her family, like you said, at breakfast, you can hear them crying about this. That's difficult. It's a difficult thing to be around, and it's a difficult thing to be a friend and know that she may not be there and she's going to suffer. So what do you do? I'm going to give you something that I did with my father. I'll tell you what I did that really helped, but it's probably not what you expect to hear. And this is only my opinion, but it really helped me through the time when my dad had cancer. My father, not my stepfather, but my real father, my blood father, he developed cancer a few years ago. And at the time, I hadn't been in touch with him for about 10 years. So what had happened is that we kind of had a falling out. It was more like a silent falling out. We didn't really talk to each other anymore. When we were on speaking terms, he would call and ask me for money. He would borrow money. And I started getting uncomfortable with that. And this is many, many years ago. So I decided to just back off and let him live his life, not talk to him anymore, because I felt uncomfortable. I felt awkward every time I talked with him. So fast forward many years later, or at least half the years later, about 5 years later, I heard a radio show, and the guy said, "When's the last time you talked to your father?" And I was like, whoa, that hit me. And I was like, okay, that's true. I haven't talked to my father in a long time. And I listened to him, and he said, you know, our fathers, our mothers, our caretakers, they can die at any time. And have you said what you wanted to say to them before that happens? And he went through some scenarios, and it really hit me. And so I took from that what I needed to do. Now, what I did wasn't probably what you expect or anyone expected. What I did was decide to imagine that he did pass. Instead of calling him and say, "Dad, it's been a while. Let's get back together. Let's talk, or let's make some peace here." Instead of doing that, I decided to just accept that he was dead to me. He was still alive, but I chose to accept that he was dead and really bring that into my system and go through the scenario in my mind. Okay, You just get a phone call and the person says, your dad died. What would I think? How would I feel? What would I go through? And I went through that. If you've listened to this show a while, you know that I like to try things on. I like to try on how I would feel if the scenario actually took place. So I like to take myself through these worst case scenarios to figure out what'll happen when it happens. So that's what I did. I decided to go, okay, what would happen if I got this phone call that said, my dad is dead? And I really took it on, and I went through a grieving process. I grieved that he was actually dead. Now, this is a little strange, but this is sort of where I'm taking you with this, and I'll tell you why in a minute. I'm not going to leave you there. When you grieve someone's death, you go through a process of closure. That process helps your system, it frees your system up from the resistance that you are giving that, from the resistance of them dying. You don't want them to die. You love them and you want them to live and you want them not to suffer. But by going through a process of imagining that this person is no longer around and grieving the loss, it frees you up to love them, to be there for them, to be emotionally stable for them in a way like you've never experienced, in a way that they've never experienced. So you see where I'm going with this. It is coming to an acceptance that she's gone. I hate to tell you that because it may not happen. It probably won't happen. If she's getting help, she's probably going to make it. But if you come to an acceptance where you go through a grieving process of your loss of her in your life, this will free you up to be emotionally healthy for her, emotionally stable for her. This is really strange advice. I listen to myself and I go, what am I saying? But I think you understand where I'm going. When you get to a point where you are no longer suffering yourself because of her suffering, you can be a whole new light for her. You can be a beacon. That's why I say light. You can be a beacon for her to look, for her to look at you for support, for her to look up to you when she needs strength, when she needs empowerment. That is so important. And if you're a wreck and you're suffering just as much as well, not just as much, but you're suffering because she's suffering and you're crying and you feel so awful, it's going to be hard to be that pillar of strength for her. So again, this is really strange advice, but if you go through a grieving process before anything happens, you will be a stronger person for yourself and especially for her and her family. Now, with my dad, this is exactly what I did. I let him go. I let him go years before he died, many years. And then I got the phone call. It was from my younger brother. And he said, hey, and I hadn't talked to my younger brother in a while either. And he said, hey, bro, Dad has cancer and he's in the hospital. And I don't know how much longer he has to live. And I was surprised. I mean, it wasn't like, hey, I was completely over it, but I was really surprised. And I was like, wow. And then I had to come to new terms with everything I went through and go, okay, am I ready for this? And I was. And I said, okay, I'm booking a flight. I'll be there as soon as possible. And I think within a week I was there. And when I saw my dad, he was in the hospital bed. And I didn't have this weakness come over me. I don't want to call it weakness. But when you see someone suffering, your heart goes out and you're like, oh no. And you almost put yourself where they are. That didn't come over me. I felt more love for my dad than anything. And I just felt strong for him. And one of the first things I said to him was like, wow, Dad, it's been a while. I'm sorry I haven't kept in touch. I'm glad to be here for you now, and I want to do whatever I can to help you. And I was able to approach our relationship in a much better way, in a much healthier way. You know, I was a stronger person when I was younger. I didn't have good personal boundaries, but now I did. So I knew that even if he went back to his old ways, I'd be able to handle it better. That's a whole different story, but being there for him in an emotionally healthy way was the best thing I could do for him. And that's the best thing you can do for your friend as well. And I was there for a few days, and then he was in the hospital, and then he got released, and he went back home, and then I flew home. And then a couple days later, my dad calls me, and he says, "I'm out of the hospital. In fact, I feel better than ever. And I can't wait to connect with you again. And I want to show you this card that I've been looking at." And he just started telling me stories and treating me like a son again. And it felt great. And we had like a 20-minute conversation. By the end of the conversation, I just felt so good that I had reconnected with my dad and that he was suddenly better. But I also felt that that was the last time I'd probably ever speak to him. Not because of a choice I was making, but because I realized that he was in a bad way. I realized that when you are so close to death, it's almost like your body shuts systems down so you don't fear it anymore. It's almost like your body says, I'm not going to give you any more pain because you're close to death anyway. And I'll just allow you to feel good for these last few days. I know it's weird to have this thought go through my head, but that's exactly what went through my head. I just had the feeling that this was probably the last time I was going to talk to him. So at the time I was married, and I went home and told my wife, he sounds great. He sounds like he's doing well. And that scares me. And she goes, "Yeah, that sometimes happens when they're that close to death," because he was in a bad way. When they're that close to death, they can brighten up and they could just seem like they're healthy again. And yes, a day or two later, he did die. And that was a testing moment. That was me finally understanding, or finally being exposed to what I had imagined many years ago. What I had imagined him dying and how I would react. And I tell you what, when he died, I felt okay with it. I was so good because we had reconciled and made good with each other. And I loved him in a different way that I've never loved him before. His death wasn't a suffering for me because I had already done that. I had already done the suffering so that when he died, I could be there for him and other family members that were grieving as well. And it felt good. And I, of course, I miss my dad now, and I wish I could have a different relationship with him now. But I also cherish that last phone call that we had together. I cherish those last few days that we had together. And I know that he's no longer suffering. And that made me feel good. He died young. He was 60 something. I should know, but I don't know. But I just know that I don't want to say he's in a better place, but I know he's in a better place. I just know it. So maybe I do want to say that. And I'm not saying that, when people get better, that's when they're near death, because people can get better and keep getting better from that point on. So I believe that your friend has a great chance of getting through this and feeling better. So my advice to you, back to where I was, is go through a grieving process now so that you can be healthier for her then. This is probably advice that some people will disagree with, and I understand that. Some people might be listening to this or watching this right now going, "Are you crazy?" I probably am, but this is what worked for me. It helped bring closure so that I could let go again of that resistance to things that are happening around me. Once I let go of resisting that, in my case, that my father, what if he dies? I always had that thought, what if my father dies? What am I going to say to him? What am I going to do? How am I going to feel because I haven't communicated with him for so long? I chose to just allow him to die in my mind and went through that process. It almost sounds morbid. I don't mean it to be, but when I went through that process, it brought that closure. So how does this help you? I don't know if it's going to help you. This is what I went through. This is what helped me. What can you do? You know, this whole process that I'm telling you now involves addressing the resistance inside of you of what is. What is happening now to you is that you are suffering. You are witnessing suffering. You are empathic towards your friend. You know she's suffering and she's going to continue suffering. But how can you be okay that that's the way it is? Doesn't mean you have to be like, oh, this is great, it's fine. You just have to be at peace with it. You have to come to a place inside that you go, it's the way it is, and there's nothing I can do about it except be there for the people who need me. How can I help you? How can I serve you? What can I do for you? And in order to be that person, you have to come to some sort of closure in yourself. I hope that makes sense. That's my answer for you. I wish you the best through this. And my heart goes out to you. I feel it. You know, a couple of times during this talk, I just have these tears starting to come up because of what I had to go through. It doesn't mean that I'm completely, invincible with sad emotions with my father's death. You know, I still miss him. I still want him in my life. But this is what I had to do to get through this situation. So I hope it helps you as well. And that's my answer to you. Thank you so much for writing. Thank you so much for listening. And I appreciate you reaching out to me with that question. And I'm sorry again for the delay. And I wish you the best. And my heart goes out to you, your family, and hers and her family.